Hello and welcome everyone to Cloud Conversations with Rue and Pete, and we have a slobber knocker of a show for you today. If you understand that reference, then you might have a clue for some of the topics that we'll be covering in today's show, but fear not, we will also be talking about all of the things that we regularly discuss as well, all of that Microsoft goodness. So without further ado, let me introduce my wonderful co-host to you, the fabulous Rue Campbell. How are you today, Rue?
Yeah, all good here, Pete. And I've got the privilege of introducing today's guest, who's Jimmy Vaughan. And Jimmy has 20 plus years of experience in AV and IT across a number of prolific employers, relevant to myself. The most exciting one being what was then the WWF, now WWE, as a producer from 97 through to 2000. And he currently works for Microsoft. And currently, Jimmy specializes in Teams, and we've got a lot of fun stuff to talk about, specifically regarding Teams, rooms, devices, all that good stuff. So, Jimmy, thanks for joining us. And
it's awesome to be here, guys. Definitely looking forward to this one. Peter, I think you said it right, the slobber knocker. So if you get that, yeah, you're probably in for some good stories that we'll tell on this episode as well. But great to be here, guys. Awesome.
Good stuff. And can you just kind of, for the folks that don't follow you on Twitter and things, can you give folks a little bit of an overview of yourself?
Yeah. So professionally, yeah, I actually was a TV producer. I worked for a whole bunch of different things, including the WWF, Geraldo, Inside Edition, all these different shows that probably a lot of people have seen. But that was really what I went to college for, was being a TV producer. And at WWF, I had the unique opportunity of helping on the WWF.com side. And that's really where I went technical. And after WWF, I chased my .com dreams. I was hoping for a couple $1 million out of that, and basically it busted right there. And that's how I ended up at Crestron. And I was at Crestron for almost 20 years. But I'm also an ex-Microsoft MVP. I left Crestron recently, and now I'm at Microsoft under the Microsoft Teams room system. So it's been quite a journey. As everybody probably knows, you always say, "Hey, I'm going to go this way," and then there's a fork in the road, and you end up somewhere else. So it's been quite a journey. But there's a lot of technical stuff that I do now, which I never thought I would ever do.
Awesome. And I guess so. You mentioned that you kind of led WWF.com before we started recording the show, and we'll talk about that part of your career towards the second half of the show. But what was it kind of made you make that jump then from being television producer to being a tech guy, an AV guy, IT guy?
It was funny. Basically, it was, I saw .com and you're talking about the days of dial-up and that kind of bandwidth that people were doing. And I saw the opportunities. And I remember some of the guys that I was in TV with, some people would say to me, digital will never replace film. And now what do you see? Every single film that's filmed is actually digital, and it's digitally rendered, and everything's there. Film is actually something that you don't do. But back in those days, we were actually doing film to tape transfers. We would shoot a lot of the promotion side, because that's where I was in TV. We would shoot a lot of the promotion side on film itself. And I worked with guys, David Sahadi, Doug LeBeau, Barry Bross. It was a small group of people. And it was, back when I started, WWF was on the decline because they were actually battling with WCW. And believe it or not, I mean, it was not a successful venture at that point. It was on the decline, and it was when I joined, we were just starting to come up with some new ideas and everything else. And I can tell you one of the stories of how we came up with the Scratch logo was kind of funny as well. But what really sort of had me was I was asked to go over to the .com side and start the streaming media side. I had been relatively successful in the TV side. People knew my name. People knew that I was somebody that, hey, you give a job to and it gets done, and that kind of thing. And I remember actually speaking to the executive producer of WWF, and I was in his office, and those that know, his name is actually Kevin Dunn. And I was in his office, and it was funny because he actually said something to me that resonated with me, and he was very supportive of me. I love Kevin Dunn. I think he was one of the great leaders that I've had the pleasure of working under. But he said something that resonated to me. And he said, here's the thing that I know, Jimmy. He goes, right now, everybody has a TV in their house. He goes, not everybody has a computer. And I thought to myself, and I said, all right, am I just going to be the guy that's going to be here because this is the easy thing? Or am I going to go somewhere and am I going to do something different? And I thought to myself, that's exactly what the radio guys told the TV guys back in the 30s and 40s and everything else. Here's this new medium, but you'll never be able to do the complete storytelling that we do and that kind of thing. And I thought to myself, this is a good opportunity and it's something there. So I went over to the .com site and it was great because I actually worked with, Shane. I was a direct report to Shane McMahon. And Shane and I are the same age. Shane is who you see on TV. Unbelievable guy, just a true genuine person. Crazy. The Greenwich Street Posse or whatever we call those guys. Those were friends. It wasn't a secret. A lot of that stuff sort of came out of real life. That was where we did things. So it was really that comment that sort of resonated with me and said, let me go over and let me see. And you know what? It was no secret. WWF has an incredible fan base, and they truly are what is called fans, fanatical about the whole thing. So while WWF.com was successful, it wasn't because we were really, we were doing things this way and that had to do this way. It was an experiment because the early days of the internet, nobody had a rule for it. Even when you look at the technology that we were using, we were one of the first, back when I was doing the streaming stuff. The amount of streams served up was very clear. It was windowsmedia.com and then wwf.com for worldwide streams that were actually served up. So WWF was ahead of real media, if you think about that, as a platform and a place and destination that people would go see videos. And it was a statistic that we were very proud of because, hey, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of entertainment out there. And to see that WWF was actually second on the list in the year, I think it was 97 or 98 that we were second on the list of streaming media. But we were also innovating, even on the tech side. Back then, there was something called edgecasting, which allowed you to actually put a number of videos inside of hosted geographical locations where your audience was specifically, which would allow dial-up internet to actually be a little bit more effective. Back then you didn't have things that would actually be load balancers or things like that. So you would actually put different servers in places. And we worked with companies that always wanted to do something innovative. And it was a great place to sort of learn and become technical. It was not a secret that I wasn't the most technical person, but if you give me a challenge, I know that I'll figure it out. And the McMahons and WWF in general gave me that opportunity. And it was not an easy decision even to leave that place because it was a very small place back then. They hadn't even gone public yet. And I was thinking about, all right, where's my next place and everything else. I was there when they went public, which actually changed a lot of the culture of the company. I mean, it wasn't no longer a family business. Now it's really stockholders, and you've got a lot of reporting to do. And it took everybody in the company. I don't think anybody was fully prepared for the change that was happening there. I think even to the top of Vince wasn't ready to report to shareholders and say the right things and things like that. But it was an unbelievable time to be around it. And I have nothing but good memories of back then. And I told you guys before the show, it's one of the things. I'll tell the story here, and it's been 20 something years since I've been there. So my memory may conflict with other people's memories, and it's hard to sometimes tell those stories publicly. I mean, I do it around a table privately and things like that, but I don't tell a lot because it's like, wait, am I remembering right? Are they remembering? Yeah. So it's kind of funny, but everybody's got a unique perspective on it. But it was a great time. I think I told you guys that the guys that are still icons from that era are the hardest working guys that you will ever meet. Everybody had a goal, and it was a fun place to just throw out ideas, and people would take them and run with them. And was a good TV. Yeah, it entertained us. I mean, all of us backstage. I'll tell you, I ruined more than one take for my laughing at some of the stuff that Rock and Austin and those guys did. But it was good. It was good.
I guess one of the things that strikes me as, so the period you were in there, you mentioned they were on the decline, and that's obviously at the height of the Monday Night Wars, competition from Turner's WCW. Did you guys feel that pressure as well, or was that more for the actual active roster, or did that trickle down to producers and everyone else?
We did. Everybody felt the pressure of it. I mean, it was, you would look at ratings. If you were on the TV side, and I was at the TV side for most of the time, I think it was 97, 98 when I made the jump over to .com, but I always had a foot in both sides. I was never really sort of off of TV because I had the opportunity to do a lot of, bringing unique things to the web because I was in TV. I was one of those guys behind the scenes. But you would look at ratings, and you would look at 15-minute period ratings. And even when you were backstage, you could find a TV that had WCW on. There was a lot of that. What are they doing? And what are we doing? And what are they doing? And things like that. And you would write and really, if you look at the strategy, Vince is brilliant in a lot of the things that he does. And even Kevin Dunn and all the people in TV, it's about advertising dollars, and it's about those ratings that really drive what WWF does. So even the guys that are out in the show and everything else, those guys always wanted to be the top of the card and that, but they needed the platform to do it. So when you looked at it strategically, at the end of the show, you would always have the top draw. Austin, Stone Cold, Mick, whatever it was, you would always close with those guys. And I remember one of the times talking about, they went over the 11 o'clock hour here in the States. And one of the reasons was because they could actually get more dollars for those 3 minutes, and WCW wasn't going over. And it was kind of one of those things. All right, let's get them, they'll tune in and the discussions, those kind of things and those little details are the kind of things that everybody spoke about. And there wasn't a bad idea. People were able to sort of accept and hear things. And that's what a great company does is you sort of take everybody's input, and you don't look at it and go, no, we shouldn't do that. You actually hear it and you accept it. But there was a lot of that stuff that we would look back and go, okay, we could do this better. With the promotions team, we would always be looking forward, and we'd be filming things 3 months in advance. And the way the industry, I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys I'm an insider and I know the whole thing and everything else, because I don't. But they know where they're going, and they're 6 months out, 12 months out, wherever they are. They know what that match is going to be. They have an idea, and they are true storytellers. And it's got to go through the story. And when I was there, I don't know if it's still the same, but when I was there, Vince was the ultimate editor. The ideas would come in, and people could pitch things. I remember sitting in rooms with a whole bunch, 10, 12 people, and just having, we should do this. We should do this. And those things would make it onto the show, and you'd have things. A lot of things are also impromptu. Do you smell what The Rock is cooking? We would, it was backstage doing a Jennifer Flowers vignette at a WrestleMania. It was the same WrestleMania, I think, as Mike Tyson was on. And he just said it. I cracked up. But then all of a sudden it comes out. I mean, if you watch that Stone Cold thing, I mean, he was his whole, pumping the Bible, and, you can have your John 3:16s, but also 3:16 says, those are the kind of things that you don't give those guys. Those guys just go and they start talking, and that comes out. I mean, even Mick with the sock puppet. Yeah. Nobody thought that. I mean, I remember filming that at the hospital. Nobody thought that.
the bedpan scene, wasn't it? Yeah, that was.
I think Mick and I were driving to the hospital, and he was like, "All right, I just got to annoy him."
Well, yeah, because that was one of the. It lended itself so well because he just happened to have a finisher that it would be perfect for.
You know what? I mean,
the mandible claw.
Yeah, and those are the kind of things, you work with those guys, and basically you don't guide them on, you have to say this, you have to do this, and everything else. It's like you're gonna annoy Mr. McMahon, and you're gonna drive him nuts, and let's shoot it. And even the Vince character that was out there, I mean, he that spawned from a lot of real life. I mean, Vince Vince sometimes was explosive. I give the guy all the credit in the world. He never did something that wasn't his own money, in basically putting it out there and things like that. And he was truly passionate about what he did. And it flowed downhill. I mean, if he's passionate about everything else, everybody else is, but when it comes to it, business is business, and he's got a great head on his shoulders for business. And yeah. I heard that he's going to do like a documentary on himself at some point too.
Wow, that would be interesting for sure.
And I remember looking at it going, listen, I have sat in rooms where he's told stories about stuff and everything else, and I wouldn't betray something that he told in trust. But I hope that some of the stuff that he's told privately to people and everything else about how he and Linda started the company and how they started delivering tapes, videotapes and things like that to the studio. And I hope some of that stuff is inside the document, because it's riveting. It's riveting. Listen, I know that they cut videotapes in their studio apartment, those kind of things and everything else. So if you think that, he was handed this thing and he just rose up, he wasn't. He worked for a lot of it, and good for that whole family, because they're all hardworking people. So
there's some great Vince stories in both of Jim Ross's books, but specifically Jim Ross's first book. There's a story where he and Vince, I hope I get this right, he and Vince are sharing a car ride, and Vince is storming down the highway 70, 80, 90, getting real close to everyone in front of him. Then he gets pulled over by the cops, and then he kind of introduces himself, and he's talking in character, and he's saying to the cop, he's like, "Oh, this is good old JR beside me." And things like that. And then there's another story. They go storming on, and he's in the car with Vince, and Vince lets out the most, I'm just going to lower the tone here, Vince lets out the most enormous, smelliest fart. And Jim Ross is in, he doesn't know how to react. And I won't put any more spoilers, but great stories in that book.
Well, Vince is a big one for bathroom humor. We wrote that, had a fart at the end of it or something like that. Good stuff.
That does not surprise you whatsoever. But that story you tell about the Monday Night Wars, where WCW beat WWF, as it was then, for 83 weeks straight in the ratings, that all came to an end in, I think, something like December 98. And it was quite accidental the way it happened, really, because WCW tried to spoil it on their side of things by saying, because Raw was a pre-recorded show, WCW Nitro was live, and they said, well, you don't need to turn over to WWF tonight. All you're going to see is Mick Foley, Mankind, winning the title. And like, what do you think people are going to do? Everyone turned over. So, and that was the catalyst, really, that, and probably the lightning in the bottle of having Stone Cold and The Rock just becoming what they became around that time. Everything turned around. How did it feel at that time when you finally turned the tide? What was the feeling like in the atmosphere when that happened finally?
As a company, it was amazing. I mean, personally, you put a check mark on the wall. Hey, we did that. But you still move on. I mean, that's the thing and everything else. You talk about Mick and Rock and Stone Cold, and I'm not a subscriber to the WWF network because, to be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of wrestling. Anything that I did was really sort of the fun parts of it. I'm not a big. Listen, these guys are incredible athletes, and one of the things that my team, David Sahadi, myself, and Doug LeBeau, and the promotions team actually that I was a part of did. And I don't know if you guys saw it. It was one of the things that kicked off the Attitude Era, and it was one of the things that that basically said, I'm 6'10", 290 pounds. I broke my neck 10 times. I've wrestled with a broken leg and everything else. And those videos, that was one of the, I was there for almost a year. And I remember coming up, David Sahadi actually came up with the idea for it and pitching it and writing all the lines. And we sat in a room and we just threw out lines and everything else. But just understanding what these guys put their bodies through.
And that was the "Don't Try This at Home" video, right?
That it wasn't "Don't Try This at Home."
Was it not? Right.
It was. Okay. It was with Ken Shamrock. I mean, we had all the guys. Bret Hart. We shot it in a place up in Connecticut, in a burned out factory warehouse that was up in Connecticut, and it was all night shoots, and there was some of it that was filmed down at the Brooklyn Navy Yards. But we did a whole bunch of different things, and that video really. pointed home what I didn't know about wrestling. I wasn't a fan. On my interview, I went in, I saw a poster of The Undertaker, and I almost turned around, to be honest with you. I was working at Inside Edition, and a guy by the name of Larry actually set me up with an interview at what was called Titan Sports. I didn't know what it was. So I go in and I see the picture of The Undertaker. You remember, this is before the internet. This is before all that kind of stuff. This is 96. Windows 95 had just come out. So you don't know what these things are. You're not searching. Google wasn't even a thing at that point. So I went for the interview up in Connecticut. And I remember I sat in the interview and I said, I don't think I'm right for this job because I'm not a fan of wrestling. I said, I don't watch it. I don't know anything about it. And the guy, John, that was actually interviewing me, John Arnold, he turned around and he goes, now I want you more than ever. And it was because yeah, I didn't have that whole thing. So when we were doing that, the promo of I'm 6'10", I've broken my back, I've broken, 2 legs, but I still got up. If you remember Austin, I still got up. That's the key. And that was the 100%. We got to get to that point of I still got up and everything. And we were just throwing out lines and we had each of them write it, but it was stylish video. That was all shot on film that was done there. But these guys put their bodies through things. I mean, our travel schedule, I did it for almost 5 years. You're 4 days on the road and you're 3 days home. And if you watch Austin's recent documentary that he had on A&E, he talks about it. These guys are giving themselves to these fans and putting on these things. So if you think that these are not some of the greatest athletes in the world, you're not giving them the right credit, because it's amazing what they do. It's amazing the whole thing, the whole history of the industry and everything else, and even the secrecy. I mean, a lot of the secrets are out now. But it was amazing to sit with some of these guys and hear the stories and just learn some of the back stuff that that aren't out in the real world and everything else. And now I think you can look it up on the internet and know some of the things, because a lot of the secrets have sort of leaked out. I don't know if you guys know kayfabe, but kayfabe was a big thing back then. I mean, it was this is kayfabe, and you can't talk about it, you can't do anything. I was there for a lot of stuff, and it was an interesting time. But those guys were great.
One of the things you mentioned before we started recording was you would have been there around the time they went from the New Generation logo to the Scratch logo, and you said there's a little bit of a story there. Yeah,
we were doing the promo that I just spoke about, and it was funny because we had the big yellow logo. And this might be one of those stories that I remember, and if David Sahadi or Doug or anybody else are listening to this is the way that I remember it. We had the big yellow logo with the blue and everything else, and we had just done this stylized video, and we were sitting in the edit room, and we were going over it. And it was late at night. And I remember that all of us in the promo department were inside of the room. And we said, that looks great. And then David turned around and he said, but that logo, he goes, it just feels so old, right? Mm-hmm. And he goes, why don't we just tomorrow have Bill over in the graphics department come up with something quick, so that we can just sort of put in and everything else. And the next morning, we went in to the graphics studio, and one of the guys just scratched on a drawing pad, and he just scratched up WWF and put a red line underneath and everything else. And we used it as the ending of that promo. And David actually showed it to Vince. I was in the room when he was showing it, and he showed it to Vince, and Vince goes, I love it. He goes, I love everything about that. I love everything about that. And David actually said, he goes, well, the logo at the end, we're working on something, but I don't know, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. He goes, no. He goes, you don't change a thing. That's what it is.
Nice.
And that's how I remember it. Now, I knew that we were looking at changing logos and everything else, but literally that was the promo that I understand was the first time that he said, yeah, that's it. And it was, it's just one of the things, but literally it was a 5-second sketch, and we put it onto a video, into a graphics thing, put it on a tape, and then it got posted to the end of that promo, and it was so. And we did other ones too. I don't know if you saw. We did a really good one that I don't think got a lot of attention, but it was good for the people that were inside of WWF at that time. We took a lot of the old guys, Gorilla Monsoon, Ernie Ladd, Pat Patterson, and we took them to an old gymnasium. And we the lines that were on that promo were things like, I never jumped from the top rope. I never leaped things. I never did that. And it was all shot in black and white, if you remember, a lot of the older guys. So you could see, if you know the older guys, you know that they have marks on their forehead.
The blade marks, yeah.
Correct. It's for the blade marks. And Mick, believe it or not, Mick is one of the first ones that I knew that actually used crazy glue.
Wow.
There was a show. I can't remember where it was, but I had to take him, or I had to go get him crazy glue as a TV. I think he said to me, he goes, "Go get me some crazy glue." I'm like, all right. So I went to the store, got him some crazy glue. I didn't know he was going to stitch himself up with it later that night. But he said, "This is the way that you close the wound so that you don't have the scars and everything else." Who knew these guys were doctors as well as wrestlers?
Yeah. Some guys have got it really bad. I think I know that Abdullah the Butcher off the top of my head, but I think Devon Dudley as well. He's got ones that are so deep it looks like you could sit coins in them. Really sticks with these guys.
Those guys did it, and one of the reasons somebody explained it to me is you can cut yourself on the forehead. You have no danger of actually hitting an important artery or something like that, but it never stops bleeding. Yeah, and it just goes and goes and goes. So,
and it's really dramatic. It looks $1 million. I always remember, Triple H was always really good at it. He'd put the long hair over, and then he'd flip the hair back, and you just see the crimson mask, as Jim Ross would say.
And sometimes that was accidental. Sometimes it was there for the dramatic. You don't, and a lot of guys, you might not agree with it. You might say, "Oh, this is too." Blatant and too much and everything else, but you know what, you do it in movies too. That's not real blood in movies and everything like that. So there was an element of we should help some of this stuff out and just really make it look like, because that's part of the art of storytelling, is if you don't believe it, they're not going to believe it. So let's do some of this stuff and let's make sure that it's believable. I mean, you look at a guy like Austin, a guy like Vince, a lot of things that they did, that's who they are, which means that they can truthfully portray that and do it on TV and not have a lot of coaching for it. There's, actresses and actors and that are out there doing it. Great. That's who they're trained to be. A lot of these guys, they're not. They're just really, really good athletes, and they have something that's unique about them, and that's how you go through and you bring out a lot of their personality. I remember one of the guys that I helped was Edge. When he first debuted, he was in the training ring at up in Connecticut, and they were going to bring him out. And somebody had come up with the idea for the character that he's really mysterious. He shows up in the shadows and everything else. So we had to shoot his video wall. So one night, it was probably a midnight to 4 a.m. shoot that we did. We just went down to Brooklyn. We went down to all these different places. Me, him, David Sahadi, and another guy, John, who actually had a film camera. We each had cameras, and we just went around and we went to different places. And he was dressed up in his thing. Nobody knew who he was at that point because he hadn't debuted. And we were shooting stuff, and and even these guys. I mean, Edge was like, are you confident about this? And everything else. And I said, listen, David has been through this a whole bunch of times with a whole bunch of other guys. I said, it's going to look great. I said, you pull it off in the ring. I said, this is going to look great. I said, you'll get there and everything else. But if you watch his career, what happened was, he came out as that. But as people started to realize he's a very talented and very charismatic guy, Hayden Christian, they built a whole thing around them. And that's what you really have to sort of look at is a lot of this is we're going to kickstart you with something, but let's make sure that you're comfortable where you are. And that's where those guys really sort of come to shine, is they have to be comfortable in what they're doing.
Yeah. They have to believe in that creative, don't they? Without a doubt. And for me, the complete wrestler is not just an athlete, not just a wrestler, as you've alluded to. They also have to have those mic skills to be able to cut a promo, to be actors as well. And the best ones of that time, that Attitude Era, could do that. They could talk, they could wrestle, they could entertain in every way.
Yep.
Talking is hard. I'll be honest with you. I went. There were 2 times that I had to go. One time I went to Nassau Coliseum, and another time I think it was Continental Airlines here in the U.S. And I had to shoot stuff, and I had to go inside of the ring. And getting inside of the ring in front of what was 20, 30,000 people is one of the most intimidating things. I mean, I've spoken at Crestron Masters. I've spoken at a bunch of events and everything else for 3,000 people and everything else. And I don't think I would be as comfortable there if I hadn't done what I had done, even those few times. But I watch what some of these guys do, and you watch them prepare in the back, and the back is it's a nice place to be. A lot of people say, "Oh, I want to be in the back." A lot of times you don't want to be in the back. It's business in the back. It's not the fun part in the back. It's business in the back. And all those guys, they're business, and they know exactly what they do. If you watch, there were times I would watch The Rock, and he was given bullet points. You got to hit this, and this, and everything else, and he could go out, and he did it. But he was doing things in the back for hours before he got out there. To make sure that he was spot on and he was doing it right. And that's like I said to you guys before. I mean, the guys that you see that are successful, this isn't luck. This isn't anything else. These are the hardest working guys that you'll find. And I think it's in every industry you see that. The hardest working people that are willing to do this. I mean, we're sitting here on a Sunday. I do this because I love it. I do the Microsoft Teams rooms because I love it. I do the TV stuff because I love it. Everything that I've done in my career, it's because I like to do it. And even at Crestron, I Mr. Feldstein, who was the owner of the company, he's since passed. But Mr. Feldstein, there's a guy that again, like Vince, I put them in a very similar category of business people, where they're not asking other people, hey, you got to risk your money and everything else. It's their money that's on the line. And it's their money, and they're doing it because they truthfully believe this is something that I believe in and we can go forward with and everything else. And Mr. Feldstein was one of those people. He was always at work. You could go in on a Sunday and you would find him tinkering in the back, and he always loved that stuff. But that's what he was. And his office, which was multiple buildings here in New Jersey, that was really his toy chest and where he would go to play. And a lot of things that he invented and came up with, 100%. It just came from, hey, somebody said something, and then he had an idea, and he went in, late at night, weekends, whatever he had to do and everything else, and did it. But he also ran a business. So it's an interesting, when you meet those kind of people, you guys probably have them in your life too. When you meet those kind of people, those are the kind of people that you want to surround yourself with. Yeah,
for sure. And it's funny because I was thinking about this, and then I listened to a podcast earlier today actually on something similar. And one of the concerns a lot of folk have is they don't want to fail because they didn't try hard enough. And that's a valid concern. But the point that this podcaster was making was that if you really, really love something and you're really passionate about it, the chances of you failing because you didn't try hard enough are almost impossible. Because if you like it that much, you're always going to give it 100%, 110%. So I guess kind of thinking back to the wrestling things you mentioned, how you get guys like Austin and The Rock on top. For them, it's not even as if they love it. That is them. That's just, there's no way that you get guys like Flair or The Rock when they're playing that quote unquote character. They're not playing a character. They're becoming who they really are. Right. And you can extend that beyond even the wrestling world, right? And me and Pete had Joy Apple, SharePoint expert, on the show last time, and she kind of made the point that when you're being a consultant or you're working with customers, you're kind of playing a role insofar as you're being the professional and you're explaining things to them. And I kind of, in my mind, which is always focused on wrestling, I'm thinking that back to being, playing the wrestler, where it's like, well, I'm not playing a role. I'm just being myself, and I'm exaggerating myself, and I'm being my best self.
Oh yeah. Well, Joe Saracen, all right. Joe Saracen, he is my cohort. He was at Crestron, and now he's at Microsoft too, as well. But he and I were the two that really sort of came up with a lot of the things that Crestron has, the Flex portfolio, Crestron Mercury, those kind of things. Those are what we did, and what we really enjoyed doing. and sort of saw. But we would always do something. You speak about like taking wrestling stuff. He blames me for ruining wrestling for him as a child. Because he was a fan of the 80s wrestling. He wasn't a fan of the 90s wrestling.
Right. Yeah, because it really did change.
There's a change. There's a change there.
Yeah.
And
the fans became educated, didn't they? Because of the internet, you had the advent of what became known as the smart fan. Not
even that. I think I think what you saw was a lot of people. I was new to WWF, and I think that they, in a blind kind of way, said, "Oh, we need fresh people here working," and none of us were really like that 80s. I mean, I wasn't the kind of guy that would sit down and suggest, "Oh, well, we should have this guy come out and threaten this guy and do that." That's not really for me. But you know what? I was the kind of guy that said, "Hey, Mick should show up with a sock puppet." And I did a lot of funny stuff. One of the things that I did with Kevin Sullivan, he and I were flown out to the Playboy Mansion to do a shoot at the mansion with Sable, who was in Playboy for that month and everything else. And we got out there. And it was funny because we didn't have a script. We didn't have anything. And we were flying out and we just weren't sure what to do. We even showed up and we weren't sure what we were going to do. We knew that we had Jerry Lawler and we knew that we had Sable. And then we knew that we had some Playmates and Hef may or may not show up. So we got there and we were introduced to all the people around and everything else. And I got to the zoo at the Playboy Mansion. It was funny because I spent like an hour just playing with the monkeys, throwing them grapes. Here I am at the Playboy Mansion. Yeah, I'm playing with the monkeys. But literally what happened was the guy that was showing us around the Playboy Mansion, Bill was his name. He said, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was here last week and everything. Yeah. And we went to dinner that night, and we told them, "Oh, we know what we're going to do. We'll have a script for you in the morning. We're good," and everything else. But we sat down to dinner, Kevin Sullivan and I, and he said, "You got any ideas?" I said, "You know what? The one thing that I like about Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was when they threw him out to the house. DJ Jazzy Jeff, they physically threw him out the front door every single episode, just like they were throwing him out." So I said, "Why don't we throw out Lawler?"
Oh.
So we did this and we shot all these different scenes, and thankfully Hef did show up to one scene and everything else. So we got him into a scene and everything. But it was funny because when it was shot and everything, I heard it got back to the studio, and Kevin Dunn and a couple of people said, "It's too funny." But to me, that's what I was doing was I just, it was, Lawler was in there, all the girls were around, we came up with one thing where in the grotto, he was actually in scuba gear while all the girls were in the hot tub. And he comes up, and this is a good story to tell too. Lawler, I know, remembers this. We had the scene where we threw him out of the Playboy Mansion in the front of the gate. And he was just continuously getting thrown out. So the scene that we had was he was underwater in his Speedo, right? His wrestling gear and everything. So he gets thrown out of the gate at the front, and we have a camera crew there and everything else. And at that point in time, one of the tour buses in LA was passing by and saw Jerry Lawler, the King, in his underwear at the Playboy Mansion. And there were so many photos being taken at that point and everything else. And I remember Lawler just saying, "Thanks, Jimmy." Literally, I know he's got to remember that one. There's no other way to remember that story other than, the tour bus came by at the exact time that he's out there. He's wet because he was just coming out of the pool. And
See, that sort of comedy works so well for me. I love that sort of comedy myself. And it obviously worked so well that it was repeated in a way a year or so later with Eddie Guerrero and China. I think there was a similar...
Yeah.
They do it?
They
sort
did.
Of thing where
I remember that. Yeah, Eddie kept going to the
wasn't he?
mansion and he kept getting chased away. That's right.
I was probably gone by that point, but that was literally the Sable thing. 100%. We didn't know what we were going to do, and it was just the inspiration of being told, "Hey, the Fresh Prince was here the night before," and you go, "Okay, let's
love it.
Roller out of everything."
Nice. One of the I don't really follow WWE these days. I've stopped following it a few years ago. I find they put out so much content, I just can't keep up with it. It's, hours and hours a week. But in any event, one of the common complaints folks have now is that it feels very overproduced and it feels kind of scripted. And from what you're describing, what you've just said, it wasn't scripted at all. It was very much, let's just wing this.
There was a lot off the cuff. I mean, a lot more than you would think was off the cuff. There was obviously, like I said, I mean, those guys, the way that they do things, very much they know where they're going. But on a daily night thing, Raw was written, on a Sunday. I know that Vince Russo, Ed Ferrara, those guys, they would write stuff on a Sunday, submit it, and Vince, Raw was changed sometimes Monday morning. Raw was changed hours before the show. There's a lot of things that needed just to be okay. Things change. I mean, and God forbid when guys got injured, that was the worst because you knew, you were going here, but now you've got to figure out how to go somewhere else. So a lot of it was off the cuff. I don't follow it too much right now either. To be honest with you, I find it, I tune in every once in a while. My girlfriend says to me, "Why are we watching this?" She can't stand it. I said, you know what? It's nice. I know some of the, I don't profess to be an expert on it, but I know enough of the background stuff. I know when the referee does this, what that means. I know, when he's checking to see that the guy's okay. I know they squeeze their arm. I know those kind of things and everything else. So I know enough of it that it's interesting to watch. But I'm with you guys. I think they know exactly what they're going to say before they get out there. I think taglines are put in before they get out there. I think if I watch it, I wish a lot of it wasn't there. Triple H, I know that he runs a whole thing down in Florida for these guys where they practice, and I think that's a tremendous opportunity. But I also think you become over scripted if you do it too many times. And I think that the practicing, it's funny because I do a show with Liam now, Liam and Jimmy in the Room. Next one's coming up actually next week, so people should subscribe to that. But we do that, and I found, we did some practice sessions, and there were other things that I've done, and I find if I practice, it's not as the first time that I do it is the best one. And it's and sometimes I it's always different what I do because I'll give you a perfect example. I have the show that I do with Graham, the MTRAMA, every month, and I put those slides together, and I sort of have an idea about what I'm going to say, but I don't know what I'm going to say a lot of the time. And I look for things. I look for people to sort of engage, and I look for people to sort of come out and say, "Hey, what about this? Hey, what about this?" And I enjoy those conversations a lot more than just let me present. And I think what WWF is doing right now, when I watch it, and I don't watch it religiously, but I just tune in every now and then, it's let me present. It's not let's truthfully just go out there. We both, let's talk about it. I mean, one of the funniest things that I think people still look at is when The Rock made fun of The Undertaker and and
Rikishi and all that. Yeah.
And he did that. Now behind the scenes, he did the respect thing, and I'm sure he had the conversation with every one of those guys. Hey, I'm going to do this and everything else. And they had to give their blessing, because the one thing you don't want to do is just trash somebody else blindly. But there has to be a little bit of that, because the truth is, maybe one of the things that we always did, and I always loved, when we would sit inside of a room and do things, you got to make fun of it. Even some of the stuff, I mean, even at Microsoft, a lot of people say, look at the release of Windows 11. Yeah, Windows 11 has some stuff. There's going to have to be some changes made and things like that. And if you sit here and say, no, we're perfect right off the bat, and this is the way it's going to go, and you have this hard line, and this is truthfully exactly how you're only setting yourself up for disappointment. Put it out. Let's see how it's received. Let's see what's actually happening. Now, I'm not involved in any of the Windows 11 release, but I sort of take that as an example for another industry sort of taking inspiration from something else. I think there's a lot of things to be said with, let's put the idea out there and let's see what happens, and let's not take it too serious. I mean, we're not doctors. We're not doing saving lives and everything else. I mean, I look at the past pandemic, and I give the medical industry all the credit in the world for where we are today, and coming out of this and everything. But at the same point, you know what? I'm working from home. It's a great thing. I don't look at it and I go, we have to take all this stuff so seriously. You have to just take it with a grain of salt and see the humor in some of the stuff that happens. And I think Rock and Mick and all those guys, they did a great job of doing that. And I hope that someday, because I traveled with those guys a lot, we were on the road. I hope someday Vince releases some of the tapes of those guys when they got off the air, because when the camera stopped rolling, one of the things was you would see all the guys, and whether they were feuding, whether they weren't feuding, they had the opportunity to go out, and it was a thank you to the fans that came out in public, and actually came out. And what they saw was some of the best entertainment I think anybody has ever seen.
I think they released some of that for Stone Cold. I remember getting a Stone Cold DVD, and it was Stone Cold basically, after the show, getting drunk for half an hour, playing with the fans.
And it was great, but you would get Stone Cold out there, and they always tried to get the Undertaker to laugh.
Yeah,
that was the goal of half of it. It was just get Taker to laugh. But that's the kind of thing, and a lot of that stuff actually turned into, maybe we could use some of this, and they took it to other ways and everything else. But it was every incident of that was off the cuff. You saw it. And until the end, where Stone Cold would stun everybody, The Rock would oversell it and jump into the third row of the crowd.
Nobody could take a stunner like The Rock,
right?
Bounce for oh my god!
I mean, they have to have it on tape, but there were times where I would watch, even Stone Cold just crack up. That's.
But I think the whole point of that was to send the crowd home happy, wasn't it? Because
that was it.
Not every episode of Raw could end with the good guys winning. It was sometimes the bad guys come out on top, but you've got to send your live crowd home happy.
It was a thank you for purchasing tickets, for coming out to the live event, and it was really, I forget how it started, but I know that was always the impetus, and the top guys always took pride in doing that for the guys that came out. I mean, when you look around that crowd and you see all the Austin 316 shirts, you see all of the Rock eyebrow t-shirts, you see all of that. They're there because they truly love it. And these guys don't take that for granted. I mean, I remember going to a Denny's one night after we did a shoot. I think it was the shoot where Stone Cold threw The Rock off the bridge. And it was me, Stone Cold, and The Rock. And it was late, and a lot of times when you're traveling on the road, we had done that after a Raw or a SmackDown, I forget which one, but it's late and you're hungry, and we found a Denny's that was open, and we walked into the Denny's, and there were people with shirts on, and we just asked, can we just sit in the back and not away from everybody so that people don't see us and everything else. And we ate in the back, but to their credit, those guys, they went out, they signed all the autographs. It's probably midnight, 12:30 at night. And we have a show the next day, or you're getting up for your plane the next day and everything else. And like I said, I mean, they know and they understand their audience. And I think anybody in the public has to take that humility and say, yeah, I know I'm tired, but I know these are the guys that really enjoy what I do. And if they tell their friend that they enjoy what I do, and then he tells his friend and everything else, that's how we grow this and we go through it. So nobody sort of looked at it and said, oh, I'm off the clock and I have to go away. And it's something, I was in my 20s doing that, late 20s when I was doing that with those guys. And they were there as well. We were all the same age, and it was great to see because they learned it from the guys that were older than them. And I didn't have that because I wasn't around wrestling, but I took a great pride in always stay humble. You can't go out and sort of put yourself that's why, even when I'm telling stories, I told you guys before the show, it's 20 years ago. And the story that I tell, I hope it's accurate and I hope I remember it correctly. And I hope that my perspective is true. But it truthfully is a an army that gets all this stuff done. And the same thing is inside of Microsoft. I told you guys, I surround myself with people that I know are truthfully in this because they love the industry, they love what they do, and it's not a job. The minute that it becomes a job, yeah, everybody just goes and they check the box from 9 to 5 and they move on. But if you truthfully love it, Peter, we were talking about the MVP thing. Basically, yeah, I was an MVP for a year. I am so unhappy that I have to go to Microsoft and give up my MVP. It was a hard decision for me to do, but I learned from the MVP community. I never went to courses for Link. I never went to courses for Skype. I never did it, but I would watch blog articles from Shirts and from Adam Jacobs and all the other guys that were doing things and that were actually presenting at conferences and doing things because they loved it. And I always said to myself, I'm going to give back to the community. And an MVP was the thing that I wanted, and I strive for it. And I remember I told you guys before I was on the interview with Sean Wilson when they were interviewing me at Microsoft, and Sean said, he goes, "Are you okay with giving up your MVP?" And I said, "Sean, I haven't said yes yet." So it was actually a hard decision to make. I left Crestron because I was building a beach house, and Microsoft came along and they said, we'd love to have you. And I remember sitting down on the couch and I was talking to my girlfriend and I said, I don't know. I said, I don't know that I get this opportunity again. I said, I know what's in front of me with the beach house and all the things that I'm personally doing. I said, but I don't know that this happens again. And thankfully, Microsoft is 100% supportive of that work-life balance, and I get the opportunity to actually do both, and I'm happy. But I told you guys, I probably have, to everybody that follows my blogs and everything else, I know I'm behind. There's a whole bunch of them that are in draft right now, but we talked about it. I mean, it's time to do these things, and that's what I'm so proud of with the MVP community, and why I promote the MVP community even internally at Microsoft is because, yeah, these are the guys that are smart, but they're also taking their personal time away from their own jobs to make sure that they understand it themselves, and that if they ran into that problem, that somebody else has a source to actually make sure that they're not spending all the time that you did. And that's the key thing to me. We talked about it too, about LinkedIn. I get people on LinkedIn almost daily writing to me and saying, "Hey, I got this problem," and I don't go, "Oh, you'll have to do this." I don't pass them off. If they've got a problem and I know the answer, yeah, I'll give them, "Oh, hey, go look at this." Or Peter, if you wrote a blog, I'll say, "Go look at Peter's blog." But having that MVP behind you is 100%. Sometimes you do a Google search and you find something and you go, "Wait a minute, I know this is wrong," and they don't have that MVP behind them. So having that moniker behind you, I know gives that credibility that this is a guy that I can trust, and I know that Microsoft trusts him as well. So
So MVPs, I mean, they do it. The MVPs that I know, and certainly this is how it is for me, is you do it because you love it, as you say, but you also do have to make sure that you're doing enough for the community to get rewarded, which hasn't happened for me yet because I'm in my first year. But what really impresses me about yourself, Jimmy, and a number of other people that I've known who have done that same journey as you, who have had to give up their MVP, which I must say, God, that would be what a decision to have to
not
make.
An easy decision.
But you're still doing that. You're still giving, and you don't have to now. You don't have to tick boxes to get rewarded, but you still do it because you love it, because you're passionate about it, because you love that community, and that is what it's all about.
That's it. And all the stuff, like, I have a unique perspective now, being that I'm at Microsoft. I see a lot more now than I did when I was with Crestron. With Crestron, I would see some stuff, but it was unique to Crestron. Now I'm actually seeing, because I'm in the partner side, I'm seeing all the vendors, and I'm seeing all the different challenges that people may have with some of the solutions that are out there. And I do have to write stuff because it's important. If somebody ran into something, and you guys know this, if one person ran into something, there's a good chance more people are going to run into that. And if you know the answer to that, you shouldn't make people struggle to find that answer, because if it can be resolved quickly and it can be resolved efficiently, let's go ahead and write the blog post. But to your point, Peter, I mean, it takes time get the screenshots, to actually set up that problem again. Because once you solved it, getting back to that problem is sometimes the hardest thing to do. So setting up the screenshots and setting up the equipment to go back to that situation. I know that I wrote a couple of blog posts in the past of, hey, I ran into this problem. I can't reproduce it. I don't know what it is, but this fixed it. And that again, it helps people. And I think that the MVPs, I think that to your point, everybody that I know does it because they truthfully love it. It's not, hey, I want to advance my career. I mean, there is a benefit to being an MVP. I'm not going to, sit here and say, hey, it doesn't hurt to have that MVP for people that are looking to hire you at different places. I know that when I left Crestron, geez, I had probably a dozen job offers in my inbox that day. Knock on wood, I am very blessed. I don't look at that and say, hey, I should have that. Yeah. I was surprised, to be honest with you. I was leaving Crestron and I was like, okay, I'm going to build my beach house and I'm going to fade away and nobody's ever going to. But it was nice and it was flattering to do that. But I think the MVP really should be. I love this. Eric Marcy, who just got his MVP.
Yeah, great guy.
NFG, right? But I met him at the event Comms V Next, and I met him for the first time out there. And I wasn't an MVP at that point, but he and I talked, and we've since talked. And I think that he's a great example of it. I mean, the guy sets up so many labs, and he is truly inquisitive in how things work and how can I do this and how can I make things better. And I knew that he was nominated for MVP before, and I was so happy when I saw that he got it.
Absolutely. Well, his Twitter handle, I think he calls himself Eric the Lab Marcy, doesn't he?
Correct. So listen, the guy sets up racks and racks of servers and everything. I mean, I know that I've even gone to him at points, and I think that's what the community is. I mean, it's one of those things. I've gone to him at points where I have a problem and I say, hey, Eric, have you ever seen this? And he can say, yeah, I've seen it. Pat Riches is another one that I talked to. Pat Riches he's setting up his new office. And he's an office services and apps MVP, and he's been there for a very long time. He actually set up a link when I was at Crestron for us. He was an outside vendor that we had do it for us. But he's now setting up his office. I'm not only looking at him for link stuff, I'm looking at him because he's putting up audio solutions on his wall, and he's making sure that his monitors are set up nicely. If you guys could see, you guys see this side of my desk, but believe me, what is in front of me is an absolute disaster of a mess right now. It's got to be redone. But I'm looking at even the guys that are in the community going, okay, how are they doing demos? How are they actually setting up their gear, and how are they setting up their equipment? Rue, you've got the microphone in front of you. I've got the podcasting stuff as well. I've got an Elgato over on the side that they just got for me to trigger some things, and I'm going to do some OBS stuff hopefully here in the future. Denzel Fernandez, I don't know if you guys follow him on LinkedIn as well, but he and I have synced up. We both started here at Microsoft at the same time, and he's one that I look at. And he offered to me the other day. He's like, hey, I'll teach you some stuff on the OBS side, and I just don't have time. I want to get these kind of things where you learn about it and you go through it and everything else, because the only way you truthfully learn things, and Rue, you said it before, I'm not afraid to fail. I'm not afraid to put myself out there and just not look good the first time, because it will get better. And it will get better by making mistakes and doing things and that kind of stuff. And you can't be afraid to put yourself out there. A lot of people, I watch a lot of these YouTube guys and people that do public presentations, and they're worried about how it looks, and they've got to have it perfect. And I remember, I don't know if you guys know Casey Neistat, who's a big YouTube guy, but he was one that just said, he goes, just start shooting. Just go out there and start doing stuff. It's not always about the presentation. Totally. I watch some people who have an unbelievable video setup, and their audio is perfect and everything else, but their message is terrible. Yeah, and it's just not there, and they focus so much on getting that. But if you've got, and this goes back to even the WWF days, if your message and the things that you're putting out are compelling and people like it and they enjoy it, That's what will bring people back. It's not about having the perfect camera. I mean, yes, I'm from TV, so my girlfriend gets annoyed because when we watch movies, I'm like, did you see what they did there? Did you see that? How they cut that? Did you see? And that's I watch entertainment a lot differently than a lot of people. But a guy like Casey Neistat and Peter McKinnon and those guys, I love what they do. And geez, Casey, I cannot imagine what he did. He did a vlog for almost every day for I think 2 years. And the way that he edits and the way that he does things, yes, it's entertaining to watch it. And he does such a great job of telling the story, but he's also editing. That guy must have never slept for those 3 years. He's constantly shooting. He's constantly putting stuff out there. But the idea is, he wasn't that day one. He had to figure it out, and he had to figure out how to do things. But he concentrated on the important stuff. Tell the story first, and then we'll figure out how we do everything later.
Yeah, it's the whole cart before the horse thing, right? And some folk, they get too obsessed about the production and all that. And it's
you don't need $1 million to be successful. I was talking to somebody the other day because they were like, Jeff Bezos is retiring and everything. And I'm like, you know what? There's another guy probably in his teens today. He's the next Jeff Bezos, and he's starting from nothing, and he's going to have the next idea. What is that idea? I don't know. I'm hoping that some of the stuff around the room systems will become the next thing and everything else. But I think there's a great opportunity with the Microsoft stuff. People talk about Zoom and the competition that's there and everything else. I don't think there's anything but great things that come out of competition. You look at WCW and WWF stuff. I think Zoom, I work for Microsoft, but I'll tell you, and honestly, I think there's some things that Zoom does that are really, really cool and really, really nice. Now, if I'm running a company, I know where my choice would be. Now, is that tarnished because is that sort of jaded because I work for Microsoft? Maybe a little bit, but I've also been around this community. I mean, back in the days of WWF, when we had WWF.com, it was WindowsMedia.com or Real Media, and those were the two streaming platforms that you had to decide on. And who knew that I was starting a career with WindowsMedia.com that would eventually lead me to working at Microsoft, but I've always been around it and I've always gone there. And Microsoft is one of those companies. You look at what they're doing, even with Windows 11, and you look at the way that they constantly figure this out and go through and just empower. I mean, the company's mission statement, empower people to be better. How can you not like that? I mean, I get it. There's a lot of evilness in these big empires and everything else. I get it. I understand it. But even if you see the culture that's inside of Microsoft, sometimes, I go, wow, why do we need this? But then I realize, it's important to somebody. And we should have that. And they're very inclusive here. And that's something that I don't think that I've seen any other place. And it's inspiring to be here and see everything that it is. I took a course the other day. I posted on LinkedIn because they gave me one of those acclaim badges. But it was about accessibility and making sure that your web pages and your presentation can be seen by everybody, and the annotations and the captions are correct. And again, I do PowerPoint presentations every day. Never thought about it, but geez, there's a whole community out there that this is important to. And just by going through and and saying it, it's an important thing. So I think there's a lot of things that happen. Like I think I started the conversation with competition. I think competition is the only thing that drives this, and it's there, and it's something that I think pushes everybody to be better.
Yeah, and it's human nature that there's going to be competition, and you kind of, I don't know if steal's the right word, but you need to basically take any good idea that works. There's no shame in taking that and throwing it into your own product.
The best ideas are inspired.
Inspired. That's
I'm not stealing. It's inspired. And it's funny because people, and I'll give you guys this. I remember I was sitting in a bar with Kevin Dunn, and The Rock was in his turtleneck with a fanny pack kind of thing. He wasn't The Rock at that point. It wasn't, the guy that turned heel and became who he was and everything. And we were actually sitting in the bar, and one of those commercials, Bo Jackson came on. Bo knows this and Bo knows that. And Kevin Dunn actually turns around and says, man, I hate it when he refers to himself in the first person. and you know what? It wasn't, I'm not saying that's where it came from, because I've heard 10 different stories about where it came from. But there were 4 of us that were, and here's the executive producer of the show actually saying that. And I'll never forget just sitting there. And it was funny because it was me, Dave. I think it was after golf. It was me, David Sahadi, Chris Chambers, and Kevin Dunn. And we would go golfing every Tuesday. I was low man on the totem pole there, by the way, but I was a good golfer. So they brought me every Tuesday. It was like, all right, we're going out golfing, and we're bringing Jimmy. It was one of the ways that I actually, became ingrained in the WWF culture was, they saw me. I wasn't a pain to be around. I wasn't, sort of clamoring onto them and, hey, let's do this and everything else. It was like, I can golf and I can play all right. And my personality is there. If you like it, great. If you don't, it doesn't bother me that much. I'm not going to get hung up on people that think that, my personality isn't for them.
Oh, you drive yourself crazy if you did that. You're not going to please all the people all the time. Some people are not going to like you, and you just got to move past that.
I swear, I remember that like it was yesterday, and I tell the story about it. But I don't want to imply to anybody, because I think The Rock came up with it himself. And I think he was the one that did a lot of that. So,
well, it's interesting you should mention that story, actually, Jimmy, because I listened to a few wrestling podcasts myself, 2 of which I've listened to. One was Vince Russo's, who you mentioned. The other is Bruce Pritchard.
I know Vince. I know Bruce too. Yeah,
and I think they both disputed the origin of that. I think so. It's how people remember it, isn't it?
I also hate to imply like this is where it came from and everything else, because there's probably 100 different ways that it came up to that. But who was the guy that did it? The guy that did it gets the credit, not the guy that came up with the idea, the guy that did it. And you might be the guy behind the scenes that actually said, hey, here's what it is and here's what we should do and everything else. But the guy did it is the guy that gets the credit. And that's why I say I give credit to a George Feldstein. I give a credit to Vince McMahon. I give a credit to Bill Gates. I give a credit to those guys, because those are the guys that did it. Yes, there's a Steve Wozniak behind everyone. And you know what? If you get credit for it, great. But if you want credit, go do it. Be the guy. If that's what you're looking for. If you're okay being a Jimmy Vaughan, who was there? I mean, nobody's going to dispute that I wasn't there. I don't need credit for it. I am in no way saying that, hey, here's what happened and everything else. But I do remember things, and it's, we talked about it before. I just hate people that come out and I say, this is how it happened. And no, unless you're the guy, don't say how it happened. If you're the person that is the one that did it, then that's fine. So,
ideas are easy. It's the implementation and the doing the stuff that's difficult, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember sitting in a meeting where we were talking about product at Crestron, and we had just come out with Mercury, and the Flex stuff was sort of in the imagination side and things like that. And we were sitting, and there were like 4 of us inside of the meeting. And we're like, what are we going to do next? Joe and I were like, what are we going to do next? And I said, I don't know. And one guy inside of the meeting drove me nuts. He said, well, it's got to be cool. And I said, of course it's got to be cool. And he said, well, what should we do? Right. And I said, well, that's what we're here to discuss. And I said, what ideas do you have? And he says, well, it's got to be cool. And that's all that he offered to the thing. And it's like, that's not really innovating and coming up with something. I mean, I wish I could talk more. I know that there's some stuff that we had done at Crestron, and maybe sometime in my life we'll write a book and tell a story about stuff. But we have ideas that have never seen the light of day that I still think would revolutionize the conference room. And it's crazy, but it's one of those things. Are you willing to put yourself behind it? And I know that Dan Jackson was one of the guys. He's an idea guy from Crestron, and he worked with myself, Joe Saracen, Brian Donlin, Joe Amoroso, a lot of the guys that did come up with the ideas. And he was there. He worked with Fred Bargetzi very closely. Fred, who just passed away. But Dan went out, and he just recently left Crestron, and he's going to do it, and he's putting his money where he believes in and everything else. I give him all the credit in the world. It's not an easy thing to do. This is not an easy thing where, if it was easy, everybody would be an entrepreneur and be doing it. But you know what? Maybe you got to fail a couple times and go through it. Dan, I know he's doing a startup. I know a little bit about his startup. It's very, very secret, so I can't talk a lot about it. But I wish him all the credit. I wish him all the best stuff in the world. And I hope. He and I text every once in a while, and he asks me different things about strategy and stuff like that. But I'm hopeful. Knock on wood. That guy in the next couple of years has a product out. I think the product that he's doing, everybody will see value in. And I think there's a lot of that. But I think it takes somebody, the ideas are easy. The good ideas aren't easy. The good ideas are there, right? And they appear easy. The hard part is realizing them.
Exactly. And if you're going to be successful, you have got to bet on yourself at some point, haven't you?
Correct. But like I said, the good ideas, they appear so easy, and they're right in front of everybody. But the guy that has the vision to say, that's it, and go do it, that's the guy that
And coming back to the wrestling analogy for that as well, that translates because not every person could make every gimmick work. No. Not everybody could have been The Rock, could have been The Undertaker. It was Dwayne Johnson who brought The Rock to life. And
100%.
and Steve Williams who brought Stone Cold Steve Austin to life. And the success that they found in those early days in the Attitude Era, it shows the sort of people that they are and were, the success that they have today. I mean, the very different measure of success that they both have. Steve Austin done some of the reality shows, the podcast hosting, and he is very, very entertaining at what he does. The Rock, I mean, wow! I always loved The Rock.
Sleep? I mean, look at what he's doing every time.
Oh my God, I never would have believed the heights that he got to, but
he's surrounded by the way, his ex-wife is his manager, Danny Garcia. One of the nicest people in the world. And deserves as much credit for everything that he's doing as The Rock does. It takes a team of people. And like I said, I mean, she's one of those, she's behind the scenes, and she has as many ideas as he does. And the two of them together, always moving forward and always doing stuff. And
I've read a lot about that. They've got the 7 Bucks production company, haven't they? Which is awesome.
I did a shoot for what was then a WWF magazine, and I put it on .com at the time. And we went down, and The Rock was up and coming. He wasn't who he was, but we actually went to Miami. And we did shoots with Danny and everything else, but we went to the barber shop that he would go to when he was playing Miami football. And we went to the football game. He was actually honored at halftime. And we took him around. I know there's a magazine article. I doubt they probably have the footage anymore, but we took him down to the beach where he hung out as a college player and everything else. And we did it. And it's funny because he's now got that Young Rock TV show. And I like that stuff and everything. And I'm waiting for some of the stories that he told us back then to sort of come on and everything else. But listen, the guy can tell a story. The guy has an unbelievable story from his background and everything else. But he is the hardest working guy in the room. He also everybody else. They don't stop. And
he's one of my biggest inspirations. Definitely, I've taken inspiration from Dwayne Johnson as a man, as a person, and he's motivated me. I mean, he's about 2 months older than me. Actually, we were born in the same year. I know we look exactly the same, right? But no word of a lie, he is one of my role models. I think he's just a tremendous, humble guy. I just love him to bits, and he deserves all the success that he's got. Really does.
I guess one of the things that we'll maybe wrap up the show on, because we probably should talk a little bit about Teams, just a wee bit, I guess.
We did promise at the start, didn't we?
Yeah.
I warned you at the beginning. I could go an hour on each topic that we wanted to talk about.
No, I love it. I could go hours and hours on wrestling, especially Attitude Era stuff. But so one of the things you kind of evangelize and blog about the most are Teams rooms and devices, really. Yeah. And I've read blogs about, I can't recall if it was a blog or an Ignite session where it was about, Android devices versus Windows devices and all this kind of stuff. For someone who very new to Teams, what is the point of a Teams room? When would I use them? Why would I use them?
So the Teams rooms are really, when you come down to it, you have to think about it as these are devices for shared spaces. I know a lot of people use them as a personal device and everything else, and they have great uses. I mean, I have two of them right here on my right-hand side, and I do join meetings from them. I've got the Poly X30 and I've got the Crestron B160 that are both right here, and I do use them as personal devices, but they are primarily meant for shared spaces. So when you're adopting Teams and you're living the Teams lifestyle, where you're on your mobile phone, where you're on your laptop, those are personal devices, and those are meant for you personally. But the minute that you go into that shared space, you shouldn't be huddling around somebody's personal computer, and you shouldn't be huddling around a single device. You need devices that are going to actually bring everybody into that conversation and have a seat at the table. And it's funny because I talked about, being at Crestron and everything else. And if you think about devices that were being developed before the pandemic, before everybody went remote, what was the idea? Well, if everybody wants to be a part of this meeting, I might have to bring in people from the outside. So we were looking as product managers at the fact that the lesser of citizens inside of the meeting is that person that's remote. Well, now we've all gone remote. And for the past year, we've all had individual boxes. Even in this service that we're using right now, we all have our own little box and we're identified. Now, what happens when we go back to the office and we go into a meeting room, into a shared space? We become anonymous and we become not inside of that Teams ecosystem anymore, where we have an identity and we can all be defined as to who we are. So now, after the pandemic, the lesser of citizens inside of the meeting is actually that person that's in the meeting room. So the roles have now flipped. You think about Content Camera that's on a Microsoft Teams room, and you think about that, and you think that was the last thing that Microsoft solved for, where it was helping the remote people see everything that was written on the board itself. And that's what that product was developed for. Now you look at things that Greg, Ilya, Albert, and the product group are actually solving for, and they're trying to solve for the number of people that are inside of the room. Now you look at something like the Intelligent Speaker, which is an opt-in service that you can now opt in Teams, where if you go into that shared space and you speak as Jimmy, or you speak as Rue, and you speak as Peter, it's not being defined as the conference room itself. It's now the attribute that you're trying to get to is immediately defined to you. So action items that come up after the meeting. I talk a lot about how to make meetings more successful and make meetings more inviting. There's a stat that I use: 30% of meetings have no action items after the meeting, which results in another meeting.
Yeah.
So you have a meeting about the previous meeting, and then you have a meeting about that meeting, and it can go on forever. So if we can use things inside of artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually come up with meeting notes after the meeting itself, and have action items that are assigned, so that nobody has to sit there and say, do you remember that you did this? Or what if I'm on vacation and I can say, hey, Cortana, I'm going to be on vacation and miss this meeting. Can you take notes? So that when my name is mentioned, I can automatically go right to that video and go there.
Oh, cool.
That's what Teams rooms are doing, is helping you in those shared spaces, because we all know, and this is at least for the foreseeable future, not everybody's going back to the office. I don't think, in my personal opinion and the studies that I've read, I don't think we're ever going back to that. But I can't say that because I would have never thought we would have pulled the Band-Aid off and everybody in the world gone remote as well.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're going back there. I think what you're going to see is people will go to the office to collaborate and be with their fellow employees and have in-person meetings. I talked about a meeting that we had where we just said, hey, what's the next big thing? Yeah, that turned into a whole whiteboarding session where we would throw things out and we would say, well, let's do this. Let's do this. And there's a project at Crestron right now that's actually in production that came out of that meeting. I can't speak about it because it hasn't been publicly announced, but it's actually in production and it's there. Those are the kind of things that you're going back to the office for. But even though you're going back to the office, there's always going to be somebody remote. So if the person in the meeting and the person remote are not on equal levels inside of that meeting, you're not going to have a successful and collaborative meeting. We spoke before about I got the thing about accessibility, and I didn't even think about doing that. And that's where I think a lot of people with their conference room technology are right now. I talked to a couple of customers the other day, and it was funny. They were saying, well, how do I get my phone into Teams? What do you mean? Well, we just have audio inside of our conference rooms. What do you mean you just have audio inside of your conference rooms? You don't have video at all? And they said, no, we've never done video. Well, and how are you going to get the nonverbal cues from somebody that's remote? How are you going to get all of these things that we're used to and bring them in? I understand video used to be very expensive and used to be out of the reach of actually putting things in. But now you've got smaller systems that can actually enable small rooms, and they're very, very inexpensive. They're rivaling that of the cost of a phone right now. So when you look at it, yes, I think that more spaces are going to be enabled for video. I think that they're going to be put in, and I don't think that the technology that goes in has to be just good enough. I think it's got to be inclusive, and I think you've got to have quality things. And I think that's where the product group at Microsoft really is sort of focusing is, there's a lot of things that you can do. Just say, okay, well, audio and video enable everybody. But if you're truly going to make this a Teams journey, you have to Teams enable those rooms. So let's make sure that the microphones and the speakers and everything that's there fits into the journey that we're going on, because conference room technology, and I was as guilty of this as anybody. Crestron especially, you would have an integrator that would do a conference room, and he would do 3 rooms, and all 3 rooms might be completely different experience when you get into the room itself. That makes it difficult for people, and you have to train people how to use things. Conference rooms shouldn't be difficult. And that's what Teams rooms really are trying to solve, is that they fit into that Teams journey. So when you look at the Meet Now icon that's on a Teams room, it's the same Meet Now icon that's on the Teams desktop and the personal side. So everything becomes shared in your thinking and the way that you actually flow into those rooms. And Microsoft isn't naive. They know that, and this is where I say competition is good. They say, we know that you're going to have Zoom meetings. We know that you're going to have WebEx meetings. We know that you're going to have other types of meetings. So they developed this direct guest join where you can take a Zoom meeting, you can forward it to a Teams room, and you can join that call right from the Teams room and use everything that's inside of the room as the technology itself. So there's a lot of things that are coming. There's a lot of opportunities, but really, what is Teams rooms? Teams rooms is making sure that those shared spaces are as effective as your personal devices, and making sure that they're there for that, and they're not complicated. Because the worst thing in the world is to be somebody that's technology scared or has a phobia of technology, walk into a room and have to be the one that starts the meeting. I know that there was a whole thing that people used to tell me. They never wanted to be the first one to the conference room because they didn't know how to start the meeting. So they would show up intentionally 5 to 10 minutes late and let everybody else struggle with technology inside of the room. That shouldn't happen. Everybody should be there. So I mean, we could talk about the features all day long and everything else, but in a nutshell, that's what it is. And as a corporation, the rise in Teams rooms has been tremendous, because the rise in Teams has been tremendous. And organizations understand that as people come back, they're worried that if they have a different platform in their conference room, it gets difficult again. I did a presentation for a company the other day where all of their rooms are Cisco, and they're actually looking in the next 3 months to transition over 300 conference rooms over to Teams rooms, because they adopted Teams as their platform when they went remote, and they're worried when they go back. The question is going to be, well, how do I use this room, because it's a WebEx room and everything else. And of course, there's CVI and cloud video interop and other things that you can do to do those things. But they said, we're still going to have to teach people, oh, you have to make this kind of meeting and do this and everything else. And we don't want to teach people. So they're looking at it and saying, all right, on a budget of return to work, not necessarily conference room budget, on a budget of return to work, we're going to actually fund this change to Teams meeting rooms.
So I guess, it's an interesting point, because when I think back to one of the old places I worked where we were voice only at the time, just because video was very prohibitive, it really did make it a bit less, maybe accessible isn't the right word, but less involving for the person on the other end, because they would it would almost feel like they would just kind of zone out. They'd take a step back from that meeting, and there would be times where you ask them a question, you don't get a response, you wait a wee while, and it's because, well, they're feeling disconnected from the meeting because they're not on an equal playing field to everyone else. And I guess that's where video and rooms, that's where you guys are trying to eliminate that problem.
Listen, I'm old enough. I remember the complicated dial strings. I remember the PIN codes. I remember the 25-digit numbers on ISDN that you had to do and everything else. I remember all of that stuff. And now if I get a meeting and there's not a join button, I flip out. And I go nuts, because if it's not there for me and it's not actually easy to do, I dislike it. And it's funny to say that, but we're only a couple years into that, and it's already that annoying to somebody. And it's not that far. So if you think back to the people that purchased the first Teams rooms 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when they did, they've gone that journey and they've gotten the new features and they've gotten things. And that's really where conference room technology is going. It's not about ripping and replacing and saying, well, I need this feature, so I need to go to vendor A or vendor B. All of the OEMs that provide Microsoft Teams rooms, they have the base software that comes from Microsoft. So they run identical to each other. And then there's that value add of the OEM. Poly has been doing rooms for a number of years. They have a whole standards-based system that connects to their back and everything else. But here's the Teams room. So they're in the conference room space. Dell and Lenovo and HP are familiar PC manufacturers to everybody. So if you're purchasing PCs from them, why aren't you purchasing Teams rooms from them as well? Because they make them. Crestron has always done those high-end rooms where there's integration to do lights and shades and things like that. Why aren't you Teams enabling that room with the Crestron product? So the idea is really to sort of take the best of breed in all those worlds and make sure that they're there, but they're there to Teams enable those spaces.
Awesome, good stuff. That's a really good introduction for folks that aren't familiar with it, and I include myself in that, because it's not a space I really work in much. I guess I'm conscious of time. I don't want to take too much more of your time up. And as we were kind of discussing before,
we might have to do this again.
Yeah, no, I could go hours on this, but attention spans and everything like that. Yeah. so we should be careful. I guess I do have one question I really want to get out there before we wrap up the show. We were talking about the McMahons earlier, and specifically we were talking about Vince, and it's just, they have this mystique about them. You're such an interesting family. And I think I picked up that you mentioned when you were working for .com that you would report to Shane McMahon.
Correct.
So I'm just curious, for a start, I'll say you said you're both the same age. He looks like he's aged a lot worse than you, but then he's jumped off a lot more buildings than you have. What was it like working for Shane?
For Shane is exactly the way that you see him on stage. Bottom line, Shane and all of the McMahons are brilliant in my mind. They're able to actually see things and understand things on a level that some people can't even see. And I've been inside of rooms with Stephanie and Shane and Vince, even separately, and you say something and you just get a perspective from them that a lot of people don't see, and they just don't have it. And I have nothing but great things to say about the McMahons. I think that they run a tremendous organization. I think that there are people out there that may disagree with me, but I think business is business. And I think if you're the one that's paying the bills and doing things, I see the same thing at Crestron. I think there's hard decisions to be made. Not everybody can run a business being your friend. But I think that Shane did an unbelievable job as a manager, managing both. Hey, I'm here running the department, but I'm also here to make sure that not only am I successful, but you're successful as well. And I think that's what good managers really do, and good business people do, is make sure that that the people that are supporting them are also successful. I look at what Microsoft just did, and you guys saw it in the news. So I'm not sort of breaking anything here, but we all got a $1,500 bonus.
Yeah.
And it was a pandemic bonus, and there's something to be said for that. And you look at somebody that's in my position, and then you look at somebody that's working at a retail store. They got the same thing that I did. I am so happy for that, and I am so grateful that I am working for a company that's willing to do that, because if that retail employee is not successful, we aren't successful as a company. So let's make sure that everybody's included inside of this, and everybody's got a thing. And I think that Shane did that really, really well, and I give him credit, because we were in our late 20s, early 30s, and yes, I am the same age as him. His aging, listen, the guy falling on your back. Everybody I give those guys so much credit, because their bodies go through so much. You look at Mick, and when we did that, I spoke about the promo that was in black and white, where we did Gorilla Monsoon and Early Lad and all the guys that were, the older guys. And I remember one of the guys came in a wheelchair, and he wasn't that old. And I just thought to myself, wow, these guys just kill themselves. And I look at Mick now. I haven't seen Mick in 20 years. And, I want nothing but the best for Mick, because that's who he is. He is the nicest guy. I mean, I'll tell you one story. We were in Arizona or something like that. And I met Mick, I think it was at the airport, or it was after a show or something like that. And it's 95, it's 100 degrees. And we're just sweating. And he goes, hey, Jimmy, you mind if I put in some Christmas music? Cassette tapes of Christmas music. Cassette tapes of Christmas music. And he would play them as we're driving. I didn't care, right? But that's who Mick is. And I look at him, and one of the things that he said in his documentary is, I knew I was punishing my body, and I knew I knew what I was in for. And he's had hip replacements. And I think Shane is the same way. I don't look at these guys and say, wow, they've aged worse than I have. They've had a different life, and they chose to do. I would never in my life do the stuff that they did to their bodies, but I enjoy watching the incredible athleticism that they put into that, and the fact that they are willing to do that. I find it's strangely fascinating to me. I mean, you guys know when Mick fell off that cage, none of us knew that was going to happen. By the way. JR's reaction was nothing but, we were in the back, and I mean, even when he went back out, the guys, everybody there, everybody had the same thing. Don't let him go back. Don't let him go back. Yeah. And then when he was slammed through the cage, I talked to both of them, after the thing. When he was slammed through that was not supposed, he was supposed to hang off of that. But probably we didn't take, not everybody took the proper precautions back then. It was a different life, and it was a different way of doing things. But he fell through that, and Jesus, that was crazy. But Mick and Shane and all those guys, God, when I see that Shane, when somebody tells me, Shane's going to be back on Raw or something like that, I always tune in. I get a kick out of the guy. He's here. He is 50 years, 51 now. I think he is. If he hasn't reached his birthday yet, I have. But he's got his high tops on, and
yeah, he's got the whole sneaker obsession, doesn't it?
It's
like, what? With Shane as well, I think he looks tremendous for his age. Actually, I think he looks in really great shape.
Yeah,
and one of the things that I hugely respect about the McMahons is, Vince especially, this comes from the top. He never asks anyone to do anything that he wouldn't do himself. Correct. And B, they've got full-time jobs. As you were saying, Shane was your boss in the media department, but he's also an on-air talent. He's doing that job and then going out and entertaining the crowd as well. Which was, how is he doing that?
Correct. I mean, it's you don't get success without working, and I want a lot of people to understand that. A lot of people sort of look, even at me, I mean, I do these kind of talkings and I do a lot of these things, and people say to me, you know, oh, well, you're lucky you have that talent. It's not luck.
Not how it works.
Speaking and doing all that. I mean, I myself, I'm very much like, you know, like Joe Biden. I have a stutter, and it's funny because my boss actually said to me the other day, she goes, you know, you say, you know, honestly, and those kind of things, and to be honest with you, and I have those kind of sayings inside of my thing, and it's because I taught myself not to stutter by saying words that I can input and things like that, and I have to work on it. But it's a struggle a lot to sort of go through it. But when I do it, a lot of times it makes it easy. But you guys know, even from the MVP side, none of this stuff is easy. You work for it. And when you get nominated and you're in front of that board of people that, and I know it's a black hole once you get nominated and everything else, but once you get those people that are voting on you, you better have the background to be able to stand up and say, yeah, I'm worthy of this. Because it's not an easy thing to do. And I give those people credit that are choosing for the MVPs, because I look at the hard work that I know a lot of people do, and I know a lot of people don't get it. But it's not an easy thing to do. And if there was a framework for, you got to do this, this, and this, I think you'd see a lot of people getting it. But there's no framework, and it's just a lot of hard work. And
absolutely.
And it can look like luck to people on the outside, but it only looks like luck because you enjoy it so much.
Correct.
Therefore, you put the effort in, and
people say to me,
make it look easy.
People say to me all the time, "You're lucky," and I think that luck is putting yourself in the right position and understanding what you're doing and making sure that, you know, I mean, there have been plenty of times I can tell you as a kid, I was fired from more jobs than I'd like to tell you, you know, for different reasons. But you learn and you move on and you go through things, and you just take every experience that you have and you build on it. And if you do that, eventually you'll find your way and you get successful. So,
what an amazing statement to wrap up on. I don't think we can say it any better than that, Jimmy. So we really must thank you for your time today. It's been an absolute thrill and a pleasure speaking to you.
We went an hour and a half. We said we were going to go.
Yeah, we did. And we absolutely must do it again.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt. Because there's so much more that we could talk for days. So we will definitely ask you to join us again very, very soon. But
and I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff. So I'll self-promote. I'm doing the MTRA every month with Graham. Come and talk about Teams rooms. Come and talk about Teams devices. We get everybody from end customers. We've got a lot of people from Microsoft on the call. We've got a lot of people from the vendors themselves that are coming on. If you've got a question, it's a great community. We get a whole bunch of people together that have the passion that I do for these things, and we just bring them together and we talk. You know, you guys know, I think I've seen both of you guys on before, and I think it's a great community. I'm doing In the Room with Liam. You can register for that. That's a quarterly broadcast where we're going to just talk, and it's official Microsoft. So it's a little less Jimmy personality and a little bit more, hey, here's some real information for you. And then I'm doing a session at Inspire with Polly, where myself, Adam Jacobs, a couple of Tony Woodruff, Michael Tressler, and I think Jeff Schertz are actually going to be just having an open roundtable. And I hope that people come on. I hope that they talk to us about the technology, all the things that are coming. I think there's going to be a lot of things. And if you've got questions and you're a partner, it's a great place to be. So there's a lot of things coming up. If you follow me on Twitter, you follow me on LinkedIn, I think you'll see a lot of the self-promotion. And I promise I'm going to get more blog posts out. I think it's key. I don't want to give up what I was doing for the MVP. I think it's important, and I do get that feedback from people. So.
I don't know how you're going to find time. You've got a lot going on there, but
And what's your Twitter handle, Jimmy? How can people reach you on Twitter?
Twitter is JRSYJMY, Jersey Jimmy. I'm from New Jersey. You can hear the accent, the home state of Bruce Springsteen, John Bon Jovi, and many, many others.
Awesome. Awesome
but
stuff.
It's Jersey Jimmy. You can find me there, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Cracking. Well, awesome. This has been episode 16 of Cloud Conversations with Rue and Pete. You can find us on Twitter at Cloud Rue and Pete. Give us a like and a subscribe on YouTube. I nearly always forget to say that. And thank you so much again to our wonderful guest, Jimmy Vaughan. We will definitely be having Jimmy back on the show very, very soon. I've been JR Jim Ross. This has been Jerry the King Lowell. No, hang on. No.
Right? Oh my God,
I'm Peter Rising. this is Rue Campbell, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be with you today. And we'll catch you down the road. Thanks for watching.
Guys.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.